Welcome. This is Heart Rhythm TV, and I am Jodie Hurwitz, President-elect of Heart Rhythm Society. We are doing our Advocacy and Action series, and today my guest is Dr. David Slotwiner, Chief of Cardiology at New York Presbyterian Queens and Assistant Professor of Medicine and Health Policy at Weill Cornell. He's also the alternate RUC advisor. Welcome, Dr. Slotwiner. So continuing on talking about these impressive proposed 2023 cuts for ablation procedures. We'd like to get your take on this and a little bit more history, please.
Sure, my pleasure, Jodie. Thank you for the opportunity. And I know my friend and colleague, Dr. Chris Liu, has also spoken, so some of what I say may overlap, but this began with an initial survey of the ablation codes. I won't go into why that came up. I assume that's been brought up earlier, but so the initial survey showed a marked reduction in procedure time. When we presented that to the RUC, we were all a little bit surprised at the dramatic change in the procedure durations. And so the AMA RUC committee, at our request, granted a very rare permission to do a second survey, at which point we were allowed to try to clarify that these surveys were now bundling procedures that previously were add-ons. For example, 3D mapping and intracardiac echo, which now are performed more than 70% of the time with the base ablation codes, by AMA RUC rules, need to be bundled. And so we were afraid that members may not have fully appreciated that, and that the times could be artificially low because of that. So, the AMA agreed to allow us to do a second survey. But a critical point that, and it's a technicality, but I think it's important for members to understand, that meeting where we presented the initial ablation codes was the last meeting of the AMA RUC before the end of the calendar year, for which we could submit recommendations to CMS. And so therefore, the AMA RUC needed to provide some placeholder codes to CMS for the next calendar year fee schedule. And so we made recommendations. Unfortunately, CMS didn't take those and just took the base codes without what the RUC had recommended and that we agreed upon. So we went ahead and did the second survey, which came back. Unfortunately, it's pretty much the same as the first survey with dramatic reductions in times. But we took that back to the AMA RUC, and we negotiated with the AMA RUC on what we thought were reasonable values for those codes, taking into account the additional work and intensity and risk of these ablations. And so I think we got a fair value. We submitted that to CMS, and we also were granted a meeting with CMS, which is very rare. Typically, the only way physicians and medical societies can advocate to CMS is through the RUC. That is our process. But because of the complexity around the ablation codes and the dramatic reduction in values, CMS allowed us to meet with them, and we did that in February of this year. And we thought we had a productive meeting explaining the details of these complicated procedures, the reasons for the reduction in times, and as well as the complexity of the add-on components, the intracardiac mapping, ICE, all of that, and the additional arrhythmias that we often have to map and ablate. As is typical with those meetings, CMS listens, but they do not comment. They listen politely. And so we were optimistic that we would get a fair value. You know, unfortunately, we have seen the interim fee schedule come out, and that does not appear to be the case. We're very disappointed. And, you know, now we're going to have to advocate as strongly as possible But that's the history of how we've gotten to this point.
Okay, thank you very much. That's that, and I understand it was Dr. Liu and yourself who met with CMS.
Yes,
That's
yes.
really impressive. Where are we going from here?
Well, it's challenging. This is not a democracy, unfortunately, when it comes to the RUC. At the RUC, we can negotiate and usually come up with crosswalks to other codes that are hopefully similar to what our members do and reflect the intensity and the risk and the times of the procedures, and come up with a relative value based on that. And that's what we did. The RUC gave that recommendation to CMS, and CMS unfortunately has not accepted that. We are seeing increasingly that CMS is disregarding recommendations from the RUC, which is very distressing to all of us. We will reach out to CMS, and I know internally at FHRS we have meetings scheduled to strategize, and we're going to work closely with our partners at ACC. We work stock and barrel with ACC on these issues, which is critically important. And I hope that we're able to get another meeting with CMS, but working directly with CMS is our only option at this point that I can think of. Congress is not likely to act on such a narrow specialty, and of course Congress is dysfunctional as it exists. So I think we have to appeal to CMS. And my experience with CMS is that they are generally reasonable. They do want to do the right thing. We've had success in other areas. For those of you who remember the ICD codes, when those came around previously, we were able to get rid of the registry requirement. So, I have to be optimistic, but it's going to be an uphill battle, Jodie.
It is. Well, thank you very much. That was incredibly educational. I know we'll be asking you to come back again, and we'll be working with all of our members and whatever we can to make changes that are appropriate here. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and thank you, Jodie.
That was great. We're going to continue our Advocacy and Action series, and next time we'll be talking to Dr. Dan Morin about his paper that was just published in Heart Rhythm. Stay tuned.